Welcome to the BAASS Connect 2021 Sage X3 Financial Session. I am Hitesh Dani, a solution architect for Sage X3 at Sage. This session builds on the general overview session that we went through previously and focuses on the multi-capabilities of Sage X3 Finance module. We will see how Sage X3 supports multi-capabilities in a single database with a single login, modern chart of accounts with dimensional accounting, intercompany and multi-currency transactions, flexible costing methods, and financial reporting with Sage Enterprise Intelligence. Let's take a look. This visual process map reflects an accounting organization that is set up in Sage X3. Your accounting organization can be as simple as a company with a single site, or it can be as comprehensive as what we see here. So you have a group of companies, a consolidated group with companies in multiple legislations, multiple companies in each legislation, multiple sites within the company, and potentially multiple warehouses within a site. Sage X3 supports a simple implementation with a single company and a single site, and it also supports what you see here from a comprehensive perspective. When you are dealing with intersite and intercompany transactions, Sage X3 supports them as well and also provides support for auto eliminations when you are doing your consolidations. Let's take a look. When we launch our company functionality, you see many companies coming here from different parts of the world. We are going to narrow our list to companies in North America, NA10, a discrete manufacturing organization that is operating using US currencies and uses a account core model called NA1. This account core model is very straightforward. Your legal ledger and your analytical ledger, where you put your dimensions, are same, and this company is only using a single ledger. Whereas when we look at company NA20, it is using an account core model NA2. Your legal ledger and your analytical ledger are same, but you are also doing IAS reporting using a ledger called IFN, group reporting with INT or international. There is a fifth ledger, and it's used to translate everything you do in this company in Canadian currency. Each company supports up to 10 ledgers, and so we still have 5 more ledgers that we can use if you so choose. Let's look at how the accounting structure comes together in Sage X3. In a traditional accounting structure, you have your company, your site, your natural account, and your account segmentation. The account segmentation can be anything, but typically it's a string tied together that is very inflexible, and it doesn't give you the ability to slice and dice data the way you wish for that particular analysis to happen. Whereas in a modern chart of account, you separate out your natural accounts from your dimensions, your segmentation, or your analytical slicing and dicing. If we look at the natural account, here is the account 59,000, IT overhead. That's all there is. If we look at your dimensions, you have multiple dimension types. A dimension type in Sage X3 can be anything you want it to be. It can be brand, cost center, customer, division or a business unit, market segment, sales region. However you wish to define your dimension types, you have unlimited choices. And within each dimension type, here we have a product, you have unlimited choices. Because we are using two different companies and one company is using is a discrete manufacturer, you see product as something like a motherboard or memory. And because the other company is a process manufacturing company, you see a product definition as bean or maybe jalapeno. So if I simply type in jalapeno, you see that coming up. The product code or the dimension code is 332. Dimension description is jalapeno. It belongs to dimension type product. How does this come together from transactional perspective? If we look at a product record for item 301, within the financials tab, you have the ability to define your default dimension for this item. Because it is a jalapeno bean deep, we have put dimension value, the default dimension value as jalapeno. You can have the same default value for every item, every customer, every supplier. Anything you do where you transact, you can put dimensions, and those default values will come in when you create a sales order or an invoice or a GL. You also have the ability to select a dimension value at that time. Having defaults makes it very easy to pass those values through. Again, how does that work when we look at it from an accounting perspective? Let's take a look at an account balance inquiry. Account balance inquiry simply brings up your natural accounts. Think of this as your running trial balance. Bank account, I have certain amount. I can drill into the bank account, look at all the transactions that are coming in, drill into a receipt, look at the payment, and from here I can actually drill into a specific invoice. There is full traceability in terms of information coming into your financials right to the source. That is from a natural account perspective. If we were to look at it from an analytical perspective, I'm going to narrow my account list down to a single account, 59,000, which is my IT overhead. Look at the account and you see a whole bunch of intercompany journals coming in, $100,000. If I now go and look at the journal, there is nothing special. I'm debiting my IT allocation. I'm crediting company NA10 because this is an intercompany transaction. But as I continue through and as I go into my dimension values, you notice that I'm not putting any dimensional value. I'm not putting a cost center, market segment, or a product. I am putting a value in distribution. What it does is it allocates this value to different dimension type based on how that particular distribution is put together. As we look at the analytical inquiry for this dimension, you notice that the $100,000 that we just processed is now allocated to three different cost centers. Single entry from an intercompany transaction perspective, which turned into a single journal entry, which turned into allocation automatically to three different cost centers. And later on, you will see me pull together an income statement report where we are looking at expenses by cost centers. Since we were talking about intercompany transactions, let's continue to look at intercompany transactions. I'm going to migrate over to my GL, visual process map, and look at an intercompany functionality. Here we have some intercompany transactions. Again, same account that we have been looking at, 59,000 IT allocation. We are crediting reallocation account 58,000 by $400,000, and we are debiting two companies, NA10 and NA20, each 100,000. A Danish company, DE10, is debited 200,000. All this is in USD because the company that is doing this transaction, NA10, is operating in USD. When you make this intercompany journal entry, Sage X3 creates three journal entries behind the scenes. Let's take a look at them. First entry is done for the Danish company. They are using a different chart of account. They are using a different account number for their IT allocation. They are debiting their IT allocation. They are crediting company NA10. The transaction is taking place in USD. The currency is USD. But the Danish company is operating in a different currency. As we go to the currency button and click it, you will see the currency change from USD to Euro. Multi-currency is baked into Sage X3 and is part and parcel of every transaction you do. We now go and we look at the third entry, which is for company NA20. When we go and look at the transaction for NA20, same thing. Account 59,000 is debited, 100,000. What I need to pay to NA10 is credited by 100,000. Both companies operate in USD. So now you have transaction taking place in USD. If you recall earlier, when we were looking at the account core model, company NA20 wants to translate all the transactions into Canadian currency. So if we go to the currency button, click currency, you now see the transaction from USD to Canadian. Again, because we are using multiple ledgers, because we are using translation, the translation happen real time and it's available to you right on the screen. Another way to look at multi-currency before we move away from multi-currency is to look at sales invoice. Before we look at multi-currency in the sales invoice, let me change slightly and try to create a new invoice. Because we are now using multi-company, multi-site capability in Sage X3, and because I have access to all these companies, I can pick any company and any site to create an invoice regardless of the legislation that they belong to. So a user with proper permission can work with any company and any site, provided you have given them the permission and access to work with that company. I'll cancel this invoice, go back to the invoice we were looking at. Here we have an invoice for a customer NA30, Maple Supplies, and they are dealing in Canadian currency. So how does Sage X3 work with this? As we look at the invoice, you know that the invoice is now being processed in Canadian currency because my customer is dealing in Canadian. My rate is 1 Canadian is 0.83333 US. We look at the lines. We are selling 10 cases at $16.50 Canadian. That adds up to 165 Canadian. 165 Canadian become 137.50 US. You see multi-currency transactions on the same invoice. Now, when we look at this transaction, we booked 165 Canadian and 137 US based on the transaction date when we created the invoice. Well, the invoice has not yet been paid. It's an unpaid invoice. We are now approaching month end, so we need to factor revaluation of currencies from a realized or unrealized gain and loss perspective. Sage X3 gives you a tool to easily figure that out. Let's look at the tool. We have preset some value. You can either do the conversion variance by journal entry or by a control account. I'm going to use account balance, NA20, site NA21, control account is accounts receivable, and I'm going to narrow it down to this specific customer. Because we are looking at month end, I'm going to do my variance based on a monthly rate. This is the effective date. I am going to create a log file. User can automatically generate a GL entry. This would be the entry type. This would be the effective date. This would be the journal where it's posted. And because this is an unrealized gain or loss entry, at the beginning of the next period, it would automatically be reversed. Click OK. We continue, and Sage X3 tells you here are the values in Canadian and US. Based on the current rate, it should be this amount, and therefore you have a variance of X. You can use these options to set up your multiple currencies. So you can set up a country with currency, currency symbol, and currency format. You can set your rates. You can go through revaluation. Now we are going to move to the costing piece. In Sage X3, costing happens based on product site. So you have a product, the product is available in multiple sites, and the costing happens based on which site the product is located in. So we go into the product site, we go to the cost tab, and the valuation method for this item is standard because this is a manufactured item. If I go to the parent record, which is the valuation method, Sage X3 gives you multiple options here. You can use average lot cost, average cost, first in, first out, last in, first out, revised standard, or standard cost. Now, some of you may not want to use last in, first out, depending upon where you are located and the jurisdiction that you report into, but it is an option available within Sage X3. Here, we are using standard cost. In addition to valuation method, Sage X3 also gives you a cost method that you are going to be using for margin calculations, which includes standard cost and amongst others, last purchase price. Depending upon your business, if you are in distribution, we typically see customers using average cost for valuation and maybe average cost for margin calculation. But depending upon your business, you have a choice of a valuation method and a margin method that you use for margin calculation. Now going back to our costing tab, when you bring in an item, Sage X3 automatically calculates average cost for that item and puts it on the product site record. So that information is available to you at any given point simply by looking at product site record. There are many inventory inquiries and reports available within Sage X3 that will also provide you that information. If you are an importer, you have different ways of adding your import costs, and however you decide to do it, your purchased items come in with valuation and costs that you have determined. If you are manufacturing a product, your raw materials or intermediary items will come in from your bill of materials or BOMs or recipes. Your Machine costs, labor costs, and overhead costs will come from the work center that you define in routing. And as you go through production tracking, you now have the ability to look at your standard cost as well as the actual cost that was generated through production tracking and be able to look at the variance between the two. If you are using standard cost, revised, simulated, or budgeted costs, Sage X3 gives you the ability to do the revision or simulation or the new budgets without having to wait for the new period. You can do cost transfer, start working with your new costs, test them, and when you are ready, you just do the transfer so that those costs now become available for the new fiscal year without having to wait for that period to start. The final piece that I'd like to show you is how does this information flow through in the system. So if we go to accounting organization, accounts receivable, sales invoices, and look at, I will need to change my transaction so I can see more information. As we look at our lines and look at the transaction, the product dimension, which is 332, which is jalapeno, already came through because we put it on the item as a default value. So wherever you put your default value, it will simply come through, or during the transaction, you can select a specific dimension. This information now goes through the system. It will keep traveling all the way through to your financial statements. Now that we have seen how your accounting organization is defined, how you put default value for your dimensions, how you determine your cost methods, let's take a look at how all this comes together in Sage Enterprise Intelligence. Here is a CFO dashboard that gives you some of your KPIs or performance cards for current year and previous year, net income, sales, earnings, debt to equity ratio, and so on. This is all coming from Sage X3, powered by Sage Enterprise Intelligence. This is a view at your cash flow dashboard. This is a view at your income statement slightly differently. And what we have done here is we have looked at narrowing down this dashboard only for companies NA10 and NA20. And within that, we have narrowed your dimension, your cost center dimension, only to accounting. If you recall the earlier demonstration where we looked at the intercompany journal entry, we had created a journal entry where we used account code 59,000, and for account 59,000 we had created a specific distribution so that $100,000 were uh, spread across three different cost centers. And this is what will be pulled together by Sage Enterprise Intelligence. If you were to make dimensions part of your reporting structure, there are different ways you can do it. Here is one example that I have put together. So this is your income statement: sales, cost of goods sold, gross margin, expenses, net income. Within expenses, we have brought up a field, analytical dimension 3, which is your cost center. So now you're looking at your expenses summarized by cost centers. And within each cost center, you will now start to see the accounts that make up the expense. And then within the account, you can see the document, which is your purchase invoice coming up. Optionally, we can change this report so that you can click here and launch the purchase invoice straight from SEI. When we look at the SEI session later during the Sage X3 track, you will see my colleague Jasdeep come and present some fantastic Sage Enterprise Intelligence report that will light up Sage X3 from financial distribution and manufacturing perspective. We are now going to switch back to our PowerPoint and take a look at a customer testimonial from the CFO of Bristol Sports, Gavin Marshall. Bristol Sport needed an efficient and centralized finance solution that would not only keep month-end processing accurate and simple, but could also keep pace with their plans for growth. Stadium revenue has grown, but managing it all wasn't easy until we found Sage X3. It used to take days to share ticketing information between two people in the same room. Sage helps us cut through the red tape and do business faster. This is a quote from CFO of Bristol Sport. We are now open for any questions that you may have. Trust you have enjoyed this demonstration. Should you have any questions in future, please do reach out to me at hitesh.danny@sage.com. Thank you so much for your time and attention. Wishing you a fantastic day.